You know what? I'm done pretending. Those words left my lips before I even realized I was standing up, before I knew I was reaching for that microphone, before I understood that everything was about to change forever. But let me back up. My name is Brooklyn Hayes, and what I'm about to tell you happened 3 months ago at what was supposed to be our 10-year anniversary celebration. What started as a night of joy turned into the moment I finally found my voice after a decade of silence. The whole thing started 6 weeks before the party. Marcus, my husband, came home from work with that particular gleam in his eye, the one that usually meant he had some grand plan that would somehow center entirely around him. It was a Tuesday evening in September, and I remember because I'd just finished a particularly challenging logo design for a local bakery that had taken me 3 revisions to get right. "Babe," he said, loosening his tie in that theatrical way he did when he wanted to seem important. "I've been thinking about our anniversary." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been working on freelance graphic design projects, the same projects that had been keeping our household afloat while he pursued his passion in real estate. My neck was stiff from hunching over color palettes and typography choices for the past 6 hours. But this was my life now, working late into the night to make up for Marcus's inconsistent income. "Oh yeah, what about it? We should do something big, really celebrate, maybe rent out the country club, invite both families, make it a real event." He was pacing now, gesturing with his hands like he was already giving a speech. "I'm talking full dinner service, open bar, maybe even a DJ. Something that really shows everyone how successful we've become." My stomach immediately nodded. Marcus's idea of celebration always involved him being the center of attention, usually at my expense. And that phrase, "how successful we've become," was particularly galling since my freelance work was currently our primary source of income. "I don't know. That sounds expensive, and things are still tight with the mortgage payment coming up, and my student loan, and—" "Don't worry about the money," he cut me off, waving his hand dismissively. "I've got some deals closing soon. The Henderson property is practically sold, and I've got 2 other listings that are getting serious interest. Besides, we deserve this. I deserve this after all the hard work I've been putting in." And there it was. The slip that should have told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. But I didn't catch it then. I was too tired, too focused on trying to be supportive, too conditioned after 10 years of marriage to suppress my instincts when they conflicted with Marcus's grand plans. "Marcus, the Henderson property has been on the market for 8 months, and those other listings, haven't you been saying that about them for weeks now?" His jaw tightened slightly. That micro-expression I'd learned to recognize as a warning sign. "Brooklyn, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You have no faith in me. Do you know how exhausting it is to come home to a wife who questions every single thing I say?" The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that even knowing it was manipulation didn't make it sting less. He'd been perfecting this technique for years. Take my legitimate concerns about our finances and reframe them as personal attacks on his character. "I'm not questioning you," I said carefully, already feeling myself backing down. "I just want to make sure we can afford—" "We can afford it," he said firmly. "And you know what? Maybe this is exactly what I need. A chance to show everyone, including my wife, that I'm not the failure you seem to think I am." I never said he was a failure. I'd never even thought it, not directly. But Marcus had a gift for putting words in my mouth, for making me defend positions I'd never taken, while simultaneously making me feel guilty for concerns I had every right to voice. "Okay," I heard myself saying, "if you think it's a good idea." Over the next few weeks, as the anniversary planning ramped up, I started to notice patterns I'd been missing, or maybe just refusing to see. Every conversation about the party somehow became about Marcus's achievements, his network, his vision for our future. When I suggested keeping the guest list smaller to save money, he accused me of being antisocial and not understanding the importance of building community. When I offered to handle the catering myself to cut costs, he said it would look unprofessional and that we needed to maintain appearances. But the moment that should have been my biggest warning came 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner. I was in my home office working on a branding package for a startup that had the potential to be my biggest client yet, when Marcus walked in. I hadn't thought about the timing. The party was still 10 days away, but Marcus was right that I'd been handling most of the coordination. I could probably negotiate a start date after. Brooklyn, listen to me. He reached for my hands, his voice gentle now. I know this seems exciting, but you have to think about what's really important here. We're building something together. This party is about celebrating our partnership, our life. Do you really want to risk that by taking on too much pressure, right when we need to focus on us? The way he framed it made me feel selfish for even considering the job. Here he was, trying to celebrate our marriage, and I was thinking about abandoning him for a career opportunity. Maybe you're right, I heard myself saying. Maybe the timing isn't ideal. That's my smart wife, he said, kissing my forehead. There will be other opportunities, but we only get one 10th anniversary. I called Janet the next morning and declined the position. She was disappointed but understanding, and said to keep in touch if my situation changed. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, like I'd just given away something precious that I might never get back. Fast forward to October 15th. The Oak Valley Country Club was decorated exactly how I'd envisioned it during those late nights when I was handling all the actual planning, while Marcus networked and built relationships. His words for playing golf and having drinks with potential clients who never seemed to materialize into actual business. The soft white lights cast a warm glow over the elegant floral arrangements I'd spent hours coordinating with the florist. Our families and closest friends were gathered around tables covered in crisp ivory linens, laughing and sharing stories over the dinner I'd arranged through 6 different phone calls and 3 menu revisions with the catering manager. I wore the emerald green dress I'd saved up for over 3 months. Not because Marcus had noticed or complimented it when I showed it to him weeks ago, but because for once, I wanted to feel beautiful for myself. The color brought out my eyes and made my skin look luminous, and when I'd put it on that afternoon, I'd felt like myself for the first time in months. My sister Madison had flown in from Seattle the day before, and she kept commenting on how radiant I looked during cocktail hour. Brooklyn, seriously, you're glowing. Marriage looks good on you, she said, though something in her eyes suggested she was studying me more carefully than usual. I'd noticed her watching Marcus during family interactions, her expression thoughtful in a way that made me wonder what she was seeing that I wasn't. I hadn't thought about the timing. The party was still 10 days away, but Marcus was right that I'd been handling most of the coordination. I could probably negotiate a start date after. Brooklyn, listen to me. He reached for my hands, his voice gentle now. I know this seems exciting, but you have to think about what's really important here. We're building something together. This party is about celebrating our partnership, our life. Do you really want to risk that by taking on too much pressure, right when we need to focus on us? The way he framed it made me feel selfish for even considering the job. Here he was, trying to celebrate our marriage, and I was thinking about abandoning him for a career opportunity. Maybe you're right, I heard myself saying. Maybe the timing isn't ideal. That's my smart wife, he said, kissing my forehead. There will be other opportunities, but we only get one 10th anniversary. I called Janet the next morning and declined the position. She was disappointed but understanding, and said to keep in touch if my situation changed. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange hollow sensation in my chest, like I'd just given away something precious that I might never get back. Fast forward to October 15th. The Oak Valley Country Club was decorated exactly how I'd envisioned it during those late nights when I was handling all the actual planning, while Marcus networked and built relationships. His words for playing golf and having drinks with potential clients who never seemed to materialize into actual business. The soft white lights cast a warm glow over the elegant floral arrangements I'd spent hours coordinating with the florist. Our families and closest friends were gathered around tables covered in crisp ivory linens, laughing and sharing stories over the dinner I'd arranged, through 6 different phone calls, and 3 menu revisions with the catering manager. I wore the emerald green dress I'd saved up for over 3 months. Not because Marcus had noticed or complimented it when I showed it to him weeks ago, but because, for once, I wanted to feel beautiful for myself. The color brought out my eyes and made my skin look luminous, and when I'd put it on that afternoon, I'd felt like myself for the first time in months. My sister Madison had flown in from Seattle the day before, and she kept commenting on how radiant I looked during cocktail hour. "Brooklyn, seriously, you're glowing. Marriage looks good on you," she said, though something in her eyes suggested she was studying me more carefully than usual. I'd noticed her watching Marcus during family interactions, her expression thoughtful in a way that made me wonder what she was seeing that I wasn't. For the first few hours, I actually felt happy. Genuinely happy. My cousin Rebecca was sharing hilarious stories about her new job as a veterinarian, complete with tales of escaped ferrets and a parrot that had learned to mimic her ex-boyfriend's voice. Marcus's college roommate Dave was regaling everyone with tales of his latest hiking adventures in Colorado, showing photos on his phone of mountain peaks and alpine lakes. The food was perfect. Herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables that I'd tasted 3 times during menu planning, ensuring every detail was exactly right. The wine was flowing, but not too freely. People were relaxed and enjoying themselves in exactly the way I'd hoped when I first started planning this celebration 6 weeks ago. Marcus was being charming, that effortless charisma that had first drawn me to him in college when he was president of his fraternity and could work any room like a natural politician. He moved through cocktail hour like he was campaigning for office, remembering details about everyone's lives, asking follow-up questions about things they'd mentioned months ago. His mother, Patricia, who usually regarded me with thinly veiled disapproval, was actually smiling at me and complimenting the centerpieces I'd designed myself. "Brooklyn, these are absolutely gorgeous," she said, touching one of the white roses in the arrangement nearest to her. "You have such an eye for this. Everything looks so elegant and sophisticated." It was possibly the first genuinely kind thing she'd said to me in 10 years of marriage, and I felt a little surge of hope that maybe tonight really would be the fresh start Marcus had talked about. My parents seemed more relaxed than I'd seen them in months. Dad wasn't checking his phone constantly like he did when he was stressed about work, and Mom was actually laughing. That real, uninhibited laugh I remembered from my childhood, before their own marriage had settled into the comfortable but somewhat distant partnership it had become. As we moved from cocktail hour to dinner, I caught myself thinking that maybe Marcus had been right about this party. Maybe we did deserve to celebrate what we'd built together. Maybe this was exactly what our marriage needed, a reminder of why we fell in love, surrounded by the people who mattered most to us. The conversation during dinner was lively and warm. My Uncle Jim shared stories about his latest woodworking projects, including a custom dining table he'd built for his daughter's new apartment. Marcus's Aunt Carol talked about her recent trip to Italy with infectious enthusiasm, describing the food and art in vivid detail that had everyone wanting to book flights immediately. Between courses, people stood up to mingle, hugging relatives they hadn't seen in months, catching up with old friends about job changes and new relationships and weekend plans. I watched Marcus laugh with his brother Todd about something from their childhood, and for a moment, he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with, genuinely happy, unguarded, present in the moment, instead of calculating his next move. When the main course was cleared and the servers began setting up for dessert, Marcus's brother Todd tapped his wine glass with his fork, the clear chiming sound cutting through the comfortable buzz of conversation. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," Todd called out, his voice carrying easily across the room. "I think it's time for some speeches." The room settled into that pleasant, expectant quiet that comes before toast at celebrations. Everyone turned their attention toward the front of the room, smiling and ready to hear heartfelt words about love and marriage and the journey Brooklyn and Marcus had shared over the past decade. Then came the speeches. My father went first, standing with his wine glass, and that slightly emotional expression he got at family gatherings when he was thinking about how quickly time passed and how proud he was of his children. "Marcus, Brooklyn," he began, his voice warm with genuine affection. "Watching you two over the past 10 years has been such a joy. Brooklyn, you've always been our independent, creative daughter, and Marcus, you've been such a wonderful addition to our family." He talked about watching us grow together, about the way Marcus made me laugh in those early days of our relationship, about how proud he was of the life we'd built. He mentioned my design work, calling it impressive and inspiring, and talked about how he admired Marcus's persistence in building his real estate career, despite the challenges of a competitive market. "Marriage isn't always easy," Dad concluded, raising his glass higher. "But it's clear that you two have found something special. Here's to 10 more years of love, laughter, and supporting each other's dreams." Everyone raised their glasses and applauded warmly. It was exactly the kind of speech I'd hoped for. Loving, supportive, acknowledging both of us as individuals while celebrating our partnership. Marcus's brother Todd followed with some funny anecdotes about our dating days, including the story about how Marcus had accidentally shown up to our third date wearing 2 different colored shoes because he was so nervous about impressing me. "I knew Brooklyn was special," Todd said with a grin, because she looked at Marcus's mismatched footwear and said, "I like a man who's willing to take fashion risks." Everyone laughed, including me. I remembered that night, not just the shoes, but how endearingly nervous Marcus had been, how he'd apologized profusely until I convinced him it was actually charming. Back then, his vulnerability had made me want to protect him, to build him up, to be his safe space in a world that often felt harsh and competitive. "Marcus has always been the dreamer in our family," Todd continued. "And Brooklyn, you've been such an amazing partner in supporting those dreams. Here's to a couple who proves that opposites really do attract, and that love really does conquer all." More applause, more warm smiles around the room. The energy was perfect, celebratory, loving, exactly what I'd envisioned when I first started planning this evening months ago. Then Marcus stood up. My father went first, sharing sweet stories about watching Marcus and me grow together. Marcus's brother Todd followed with funny anecdotes about our dating days, including how Marcus had worn 2 different colored shoes on our third date because he was so nervous. Everyone was laughing, clapping, having a wonderful time. Then Marcus stood up. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, tapping his wine glass with that confident smile. "Looking around this room, seeing all the people who matter most to us, it makes me reflect on this incredible journey Brooklyn and I have been on." I smiled, expecting the usual anniversary speech. Some sweet memories, some gratitude, some hopes for the future. I had no idea I was about to be ambushed. "You know, when I first met Brooklyn in college, she was different than she is now," Marcus continued, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. "She was more, let's say, ambitious back then, always talking about her dreams of being a serious artist, starting her own design firm." A few people chuckled, but I noticed uncomfortable shifting in chairs. My sister's smile faltered. "But life has a way of teaching us about realistic expectations, doesn't it?" His voice carried that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate in private, but now he was using it in front of everyone we cared about. Brooklyn learned that sometimes we have to set aside those big dreams and focus on what really matters, supporting your husband's career, being practical about money. My face was burning. Around the room, I could see people exchanging glances. "I mean, don't get me wrong," Marcus continued with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Brooklyn tries her best with her little design projects. It's cute, really. She makes these graphics for small businesses, does some wedding invitations. It's not exactly the Metropolitan Museum, but hey, we can't all be fine artists, right?" The room was getting quieter. Even his own family looked uncomfortable now. "And let's be honest about the money situation," he said, taking another sip of wine like he was just chatting casually instead of destroying me in public. "Brooklyn's always been a bit financially dependent, not great with managing money, tends to spend on things we don't need. Thank God I've been able to step up and handle the real financial responsibilities in our marriage. I felt like I'd been slapped, multiple times, in front of 60 people. But that's what marriage is about, right? One partner being strong where the other is weak. Brooklyn's weakness has always been her unrealistic expectations about her career, her spending, her tendency to be a bit dramatic when things don't go her way. My hands were shaking. This was supposed to be our celebration, our anniversary, our night. And he was using it to humiliate me, to rewrite our entire history in a way that made him the hero and me the burden. Some of you probably remember how Brooklyn used to be, Marcus continued, gesturing with his wine glass. Always so intense about her art, always convinced she was going to change the world with her creativity. But passion without practicality is just, well, it's just noise, isn't it? Several people were openly staring at him now, and not in a good way. So here's to 10 more years of Brooklyn learning to be more practical, more supportive, and hopefully a little less. He paused, smiling at the room like they were all in on some joke. Challenging, because that's what love is, helping your partner become the person they need to be, even when they resist. He raised his glass. To Brooklyn for finally growing up, and to our marriage, which has taught her so much about reality. The silence that followed was deafening. A few people awkwardly raised their glasses, but most just sat there looking mortified. And that's when something inside me snapped. You know what? I'm done pretending. I was standing before I realized it, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every eye in the room turned to me, and I could see the panic flash across Marcus's face as I walked toward him with purpose I hadn't felt in years. Give me that microphone, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Brooklyn, what are you? Give. Me. The microphone. The room held its breath as I took it from his suddenly sweaty hand. I looked out at all these people, our family, our friends, and realized that this was my moment. After 10 years of being diminished, dismissed, and rewritten, I was going to tell the truth. Hi, everyone, I began, surprised by how calm I sounded. I'm Brooklyn, in case Marcus's speech made you forget I have my own identity and voice. I'd like to tell you the real story of our marriage, since my husband seems to have some gaps in his memory. Marcus tried to reach for the mic. Brooklyn, come on, don't... I stepped away from him. Don't what? Don't tell the truth? Don't defend myself? Sorry, Marcus, but I'm done with that. I turned back to our guests. Let me tell you about those little design projects Marcus finds so amusing. Last year, my graphic design work brought in $47,000. This year, it's on track to bring in $60,000. Meanwhile, Marcus's real estate career, the one I'm supposed to be so supportive of, has netted us exactly $12,000 in commissions in the past 18 months. You could hear a pin drop. And those unrealistic expectations about my art? I was accepted to the graduate program at Rhode Island School of Design 10 years ago, full scholarship. But Marcus convinced me it was selfish to move away from his family, that I should be more supportive of his dreams instead of chasing mine. My voice was getting stronger. He mentioned my dramatic tendencies and poor money management. Let me share some context. Last month, I found out Marcus spent $8,000 of our emergency fund on a networking trip to Vegas with his buddies. When I asked about it, I was being dramatic. When I suggested maybe he should get a part-time job to help with bills while building his real estate career, I was being unsupportive. I could see people looking at each other, then back at me, then at Marcus, who looked like he wanted to disappear. But here's the best part, I continued. Marcus talks about helping me grow up and become more practical. You know what's practical? Realizing that I've been supporting a grown man who spends his days playing golf and calling it client development while I work 60-hour weeks to pay our mortgage. My sister Madison was openly grinning now. My parents looked shocked but proud. Even some of Marcus's family members were nodding slightly. I want to tell you all about the real dynamic in our marriage, I continued, When Marcus says I need to be more supportive, what he means is I should work myself to exhaustion while also managing all the housework, all the planning, all the emotional labor, and then smile and nod when he takes credit for our stability. "Brooklyn, please," Marcus whispered, but his voice cracked. "Oh, now you want me to stop? Where was that energy when you were rewriting our entire relationship to make yourself look like some kind of patient saint?" I looked directly at his mother, Patricia, who had spent years making little comments about my career choices. "Patricia, you've always wondered why I don't have children yet. Well, it's hard to have kids with someone when you already feel like you're raising one. Marcus can't remember to pay a single bill on time, but somehow I'm the one who's not ready for real responsibility." The color drained from Patricia's face. She looked at her son, then back at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw something like respect in her eyes. "And Marcus, since you want to talk about my unrealistic dreams, let me share something with everyone. 3 months ago, I was offered a position as senior graphic designer at Morrison Creative. It's a $75,000 salary plus benefits, with the potential to build their entire visual brand department. I turned it down because you said it would be too much pressure and might interfere with my duties at home." Gasps rippled through the room. My father actually stood up slightly in his chair. "But here's the thing I realized tonight, watching you try to rewrite our history to make yourself the hero. I don't need your permission to live my life anymore. You want to know what this marriage has really been? It's been me making myself smaller and smaller so you could feel bigger. It's been me apologizing for my successes so you wouldn't feel insecure. It's been me pretending your failures were just learning experiences while you criticized every single thing I did." Marcus was standing there looking like a deer in headlights, probably realizing that years of gaslighting me in private had not prepared him for me finding my voice in public. I've spent 10 years believing that love meant diminishing myself, that being a good wife meant accepting your version of reality, even when it contradicted what I lived every single day. I thought loyalty meant letting you take credit for my work and blame me for your shortcomings. I paused, looking around the room. But tonight, listening to you twist our story to make me sound like some kind of delusional, irresponsible burden, I realized something important. This isn't love. This is control. And I'm done being controlled. The silence was complete. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. So Marcus, here's to 10 years of me learning what I will and won't accept in a relationship. Here's to me finally understanding that your comfort with my discomfort is not love. And here's to everyone in this room witnessing the moment I stopped apologizing for being successful, ambitious, and yes, sometimes dramatic. I set the microphone down on the table with a soft thud that somehow seemed to echo through the entire room. Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the dinner I planned, in the venue I booked, with the flowers I arranged. I know I finally did. What happened next was like a movie scene, but one of those moments that feels surreal when you're living it. For about 10 seconds, nobody moved or said anything. The silence was so complete, I could hear the ice settling in water glasses, the distant hum of the air conditioning, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Then my sister Madison stood up and started clapping. Slowly at first, deliberately, her eyes never leaving mine. The sound of her applause seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room, and I could see people turning to look at her, with expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity to dawning understanding. But then my parents joined in. My mother was crying, not the embarrassed, uncomfortable tears I might have expected, but what looked like tears of pride and relief. My father was applauding with genuine enthusiasm, his face beaming with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Then Marcus's brother Todd started clapping. Todd, who had given that sweet, supportive speech just minutes earlier about what a perfect couple we were, he was looking at me with something like admiration, and when his eyes flicked to his brother, I saw disappointment there that was impossible to miss. Within a minute, almost the entire room was applauding. Not everyone. Some of Marcus's extended family looked bewildered, and a few people seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the whole situation. but the vast majority of our guests were on their feet, clapping not just politely, but enthusiastically. My college friend Sarah was wiping tears from her eyes while she applauded. My Uncle Dave was nodding vigorously and saying something to his wife that I couldn't hear, but that made her start clapping harder. Even some of the country club staff members, who were supposed to be professionally invisible, were exchanging glances and small smiles. Marcus just stood there in the middle of it all, his face cycling through embarrassment, anger, and what might have been the first genuine self-awareness he'd shown in years. He looked around the room like he was waiting for someone to defend him, to say I was being unfair or dramatic. But that defense never came. The applause went on longer than I'd expected. Long enough that I started to feel overwhelmed by it, by the validation I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. When it finally died down, people didn't immediately sit back down. There was this strange, charged energy in the room, like something significant had just happened, and everyone knew it. That's when Patricia walked up to me. Marcus's mother had never been openly hostile to me, but she'd never been warm either. For 10 years, she'd maintained a kind of polite distance, treating me like a temporary fixture in her son's life, rather than a permanent member of the family. She'd made little comments over the years, about my career choices, my wardrobe, my decision to wait to have children, always couched as concerns or suggestions, but clearly judgments. Now she stood in front of me, her usually perfect composure completely gone. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, and smaller somehow. "Brooklyn," she said quietly, her voice shaking slightly, "I owe you an apology." I could hear conversations starting up again around the room, but they were subdued, like people were trying to give us privacy, while still being close enough to witness this moment. "Patricia, you don't have to—" "No, I do." She glanced back at Marcus, who was now sitting alone at our head table, staring down at his hands like they held the answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. I didn't realize—" She paused, looking back at me with tears in her eyes. "I thought you were the problem." The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't trying to save face or minimize her role in our dynamic. She was acknowledging something that had probably been obvious to everyone except the people living inside it. All these years, when Marcus would complain about you being difficult or unrealistic, I believed him. I thought he was being patient with a wife who didn't appreciate what she had. I made comments. I took his side. I treated you like you were the one causing problems in your marriage. People were definitely listening now, though they were pretending not to. This conversation was as much a part of the evening's revelations as my speech had been. "You deserved better from all of us," Patricia continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. "You deserved better from me, and you certainly deserved better from my son." She looked back at Marcus again, and this time, when she spoke, her voice was loud enough for him to hear clearly. "I raised him to be better than this." The conversations around us died down again. Marcus looked up at his mother with an expression that was part hurt, part angry, and part something I couldn't identify. Maybe shame, maybe recognition. "Mom," he started to say, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Not now, Marcus. Not here." She turned back to me, reaching for my hands. "Brooklyn, I want you to know that whatever happens next, you have my support. And I'm sorry it took me 10 years to see what was right in front of me." She hugged me then, and it wasn't the polite, distant embrace I'd gotten from her at previous family gatherings. It was real and warm, and felt like an acknowledgement of something that had been broken between us for a very long time. After Patricia walked away, people started coming up to me throughout the rest of the evening. It was like my speech had given everyone permission to say things they'd been thinking, but hadn't felt comfortable expressing before tonight. My Uncle Dave told me he'd been waiting years for someone to call Marcus out. "I never said anything because it wasn't my place," he admitted. "But watching you get smaller and smaller at family gatherings, it was hard to watch, kiddo. You used to light up every room you walked into." My college friend Jenny said she'd always wondered why I seemed so different around Marcus than I had been in school. "You used to be this force of nature," she said, gripping my arm as she spoke. So confident, so full of ideas and dreams. I kept waiting for that Brooklyn to come back, but she seemed to disappear more every time I saw you. Even some of Marcus's family members pulled me aside to share their own observations about his behavior over the years. His cousin Lisa told me she'd always thought he was too critical of my work. Every time you'd mention a project you were excited about, he'd find some way to downplay it or point out potential problems. I always wondered how that felt. His uncle Ray said he'd noticed how Marcus never seemed to celebrate my successes. Every time you accomplished something, and honey, you accomplished a lot, Marcus would find a way to change the subject or make it about something else. I always wondered why he couldn't just be proud of his wife. But the most important moments came from my own family. My sister Madison found me on the terrace later that night, where I'd stepped outside to get some air and process everything that had happened. "Holy shit, Brooklyn," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I am so fucking proud of you." "Language," I said automatically, then started laughing because it was such a ridiculous thing to worry about after the evening we'd just had. "No, I'm serious. Do you know how long I've been waiting for you to do something like that?" "Years, Brooklyn. Years of watching you disappear into that marriage, of seeing you make yourself smaller every time I visited, of listening to you make excuses for him treating you like you were some kind of burden instead of the amazing woman you actually are. Why didn't you say something?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it," she said simply. "And because I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, you'd choose him over me. Which, let's be honest, you probably would have 2 years ago." She was right. 2 years ago, I would have defended Marcus and distanced myself from anyone who criticized our marriage. I would have seen it as disloyalty rather than love, as jealousy rather than concern. "Madison," I said, the words coming out before I'd fully processed the thought, "I think I need to get divorced." "I think you do too," she replied without hesitation. "And I think you're going to be absolutely amazing on your own." Marcus and I separated 2 weeks later. To his credit, he didn't try to gaslight me about what happened at the anniversary dinner. Maybe having 60 witnesses to his behavior made denial impossible, even for him. The divorce was finalized 4 months ago. I kept the house, since I'd been paying the mortgage anyway, and Marcus moved in with his brother, while he figured things out. I took the job at Morrison Creative. I'm building their visual brand department from the ground up, and last month, I got my first raise. I'm also back in therapy, working through a decade of conditioning that taught me my voice didn't matter. But the most important thing? I enrolled in graduate school. At 32, I'm finally pursuing that MFA in fine arts I gave up 10 years ago. It turns out my portfolio was strong enough to get me into 3 different programs. I see Marcus occasionally around town. He's dating someone new, a 24-year-old who hangs on his every word and seems to think his opinions about everything are fascinating. Sometimes I feel sorry for her. Sometimes I remind myself that everyone makes their own choices. The anniversary dinner has become legendary in both our families. My sister Madison still brings it up at family gatherings, calling it the night Brooklyn found her spine. My parents tell their friends about it. Even some of Marcus's relatives have stayed in touch with me, apologizing for years of enabling his behavior. People ask me if I regret staying quiet for so long, if I wish I'd spoken up sooner. The truth is, I couldn't have had that moment of clarity until I was ready for it. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom before we find the courage to stand up. I learned that love doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller. Real love celebrates your successes, supports your dreams, and never tries to convince you that your reality isn't real. I learned that the people who truly care about you will recognize authentic truth when they hear it, even if it's uncomfortable. And I learned that sometimes the most important speech you'll ever give is the one you never planned to make. 3 months after that anniversary dinner, I was cleaning out old boxes and found a journal from our engagement period. There was an entry I'd written after Marcus had criticized a painting I'd spent weeks working on. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am being unrealistic about my art. Maybe I should focus on being more supportive instead of always wanting attention for my work. I love him, so I should trust his judgment about what's best for us. Reading those words broke my heart for the woman who wrote them, but it also filled me with gratitude for the woman who finally stood up at that microphone and said, "You know what? I'm done pretending." Because the truth is, I was never pretending to be someone I wasn't. I was pretending to be less than who I was. And there's a world of difference between those two things. Your voice matters. Your dreams matter. Your version of reality matters. Don't let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. And if someone tries to rewrite your story to make themselves the hero, take the mic and set the record straight. Trust me, the applause you'll hear will be worth every uncomfortable moment that follows.